The honourable member for Churchill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question to my colleague is resuming debate. Okay, great.
The honourable member for Churchill, I may have misunderstood. I did call questions and comments, and I know that she is the next speaker as well. So does she wish to? There is still time for questions and comments if she wishes. Okay.
My case here in the speech. Either way, we were okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the clarification. And I'd like to note that I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, the member for Rivière-des-Mille. Mr. Speaker, never before has the old feminist adage been more appropriate. In the case of today's Opposition Day motion, the political is very, very personal. Almost all women, and even a few men, are united in menstruation for most of their lives. The tampon tax has brought Canadians together because in a country where the gender pay gap is twice the global average, our bodies deserve a tax break. More than 85,000 Canadians have signed a petition calling on the federal government to stop charging HST and GST on menstruation products, and I am very proud to be joining them today in supporting my colleague from London, Fanshawe, in calling on the government to classify menstrual products as an essential item. Because guess what, folks? They are. And I'm pretty sure that if men were menstruators, they would never have been taxing tampons in the first place. The remarkable thing about this motion is that it is living proof of the political strength and savvy of grassroots feminist activism. This campaign began on the ground, or I should say online. And I'm consistently impressed and inspired by how young activists have actualized themselves and how they are changing the conversations we are having in our country through social media. This campaign went viral online, and a few short months later, we are debating it here in the House of Commons. This issue is clear, and it is a matter of discrimination. Only those that menstruate are being taxed. Cisgendered men get off tax-free. So the government is making $36 million every year exclusively off of women and trans men. To remove this tax would be to correct a clear case of gender-based discrimination. Can the government really argue that tampons and pads are not essential products? But it's not just a matter of principle, Mr. Speaker. For women living in poverty, in the most practical terms, it's about economic security. Among adults 18 and older, women account for 54% of people living in poverty in Canada. More than 1 million adult women are living in poverty. 21% of single mothers in Canada raise their children while living in poverty, as opposed to 7% of single fathers. Meanwhile, menstrual products are extremely expensive. For women who are living in poverty and women in shelters, we've heard of how onerous it is to buy these things. In fact, these women are so financially vulnerable that an extra $20 every month can be a real burden. Corporate manufacturers know that they can charge a lot for tampons and pads because women have no choice in buying them. And this underscores my point, Mr. Speaker. We are talking about an essential product. As Jen Zarate writes in the Winnipeg Free Press, quote, "For me, that time of the month is a minor inconvenience. For those who are living in poverty or are experiencing homelessness, it is incredibly challenging. Many are forced to stretch their stocks of menstrual product, get creative, or go without," unquote. On the positive side, I feel incredibly happy to be here with my colleagues pushing for this change. The fact that women across the country have taken matters into their own hands to bring menstruation into the mainstream makes me proud to be a feminist. I also want to note that the puns have been pretty great. Quote, "No tax on periods, period," unquote. Or, quote, "On this issue, there is no womb for debate," unquote. The reality is we need more destigmatizing debates like this one, when women can take up space in this house, their house, our house, to talk about our bodies, our rights, and our reproductive health. This way we see the power of feminism in Parliament. And I have to say that I'm very proud to be NDP because it is our party that chose to facilitate this dialogue between young women and their government. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we need to recognize that the gender gap in Canada is real, and this government, time and time again, does nothing to address it. Economic issues are women's issues. Tax issues are women's issues. Gender-based discrimination can be perpetrated by a federal government as surely as it can be perpetrated by an individual on the street or in the workplace. In closing, I want to thank the fierce women who started this campaign and the tens of thousands of women who have joined it. I want to give out a shout out to the men and my male colleagues who support this cause. And my message today is let's pass this motion. Let's take immediate action rather than putting it off. Because the argument is clear, the argument is accurate, and let's be honest, there's just no room for debate. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker, and I listened with interest. And you know, it's interesting that feminine hygiene products are under the luxury tax category, but that's not what I want to ask our Speaker about here. The government has suggested that they'll be supporting this motion, but that they won't be doing anything now about it. And I wonder if a member from Churchill would like to make a comment on that.
The honourable member for Churchill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for that question, because Canadian women, Canadians need to know that kind of support, which is not support in and of itself, is not good enough. I mean, we're talking about really a case of unequal treatment. The need to recognize that this is an essential product, the need to recognize the kind of barriers that women face as a result of this situation. It's a simple act, and an act, frankly, of leadership. But what can Canadian women expect more from this government? This government, time and time again, has ignored measures that would help women achieve equality. In fact, they have taken measures that further serve to marginalize women, whether it's in terms of their measures of taxation, whether it's their economic policy, whether it's their failure to take action on missing and murdered Indigenous women and violence against women. So I hope that the activists that have been pushing this debate will continue to push beyond this so-called support of the government and call for immediate action, as we in the NDP are calling for today.
Very good.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Churchill for her words. Obviously, this is ridiculous, and it makes no sense that you would classify feminine hygiene products as a luxury item. That's hopefully well established on both sides of the House. And it shows a case of misprioritization from the Conservatives, where they have billions to help out wealthy families and a $700 million every year for a CEO tax loophole. But when we get to an issue like this, they say, well, we can't do anything about it right now. Look to the future. Well, the future is the next election. We have a budget bill in front of us right now. The Conservatives have chosen not to act on. My question is this. In this last budget document from the Conservatives, every year they roll out a typical family, Mr. Speaker. It's usually a family of four, a husband and wife and 2 kids, and that's fine, the Conservatives' worldview. And in their typical family, in the past years, the woman has earned more than the man, and this one year, suddenly the Conservatives flipped that ratio around, because in order to justify their $2 billion income splitting plan, in order for that to make sense in a Conservative worldview, suddenly the man had to earn quite a bit more than the woman, and the woman, in fact, had to, under the Conservatives, take a $50,000 or $60,000 pay cut to qualify for income splitting. So the Conservatives could show their social agenda through taxation, which is not only did they scrap pay equity law in Canada, but now they want to really describe how they want the families to work under their Leave It to Beaver worldview. They want to go back in time and make choices for Canadian families, and particularly for Canadian women. We know women earn 3/4 of what men do for the same work in this country still. So rather than helping rectify that, Conservatives seem to be interested in enshrining that and making it even worse in some cases. I wonder if my friend can make a comment to that.
The honourable member for Churchill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I think that was a great synopsis of what we're dealing with here. I mean, the Conservatives' policy vis-a-vis Canadian women ranges from the era of the 1950s to, frankly, the 1850s some days, especially when we talk about reproductive rights and their regressive views on access to abortions and reproductive services. So, but let's bring it back to the debate today. We're talking about a very easy, simple step here. Moving the categorization from luxury items, which we've all made the case they're not, to essential items. And recognizing that with some simple steps, this change could be brought into effect. They can follow the lead of numerous provinces that have done this very same thing. And as for waiting, I mean, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to sort of remind this government that young people in Canada have had enough of these kinds of antics. I mean, if there's one demographic that is pretty solidly opposed to the kind of policies coming out of this government, it is young Canadians. So what better way to show some sort of sense of listening or reflection of the kind of priorities that young people, particularly young women, are putting forward than saying, no tax on tampons. We're going to take this action. And yet, once again, they're willing to put it off. Once again, they're willing to avoid listening to the voices of Canadian women. And once again, they're either stuck in the 1950s or maybe the 1850s.